All right, I just heard it's 11 a.m. So I want to start off with hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the CASH webinar, Confronting the Coronavirus at School, Cleaning, Preparation, and Maintenance. I'm Julie Arthur. I'm the CASH Chair and Executive Director of Facilities Planning for Palm Springs Unified Schools for today's webinar. Due to the almost 350 attendees online, your call is muted. If you have a question, please use the chat box at the bottom left of your screen and type in your question. We anticipate many questions with the almost 350 participants, but we only have about 10 or 15 minutes for question and answers. And we'll look for patterns during the webinar with an eye towards repetition and category. We also anticipate following up with emails or even another webinar to answer questions as best we can. So let's get started. I know I can tell you we're living in extraordinary times as information and data is changing by the minute. We'll continue to keep you informed. As we learn more, similar to what we're doing right now. And I actually wouldn't be surprised as we're on our call today, we hear something quite shocking from the media, and we could be talking about it right on the webinar. We are in an absolutely fluid state. Change in our environment requires us to transform, and we'll continue sharing of information with our CASH members throughout the state. No matter how many difficulties arise, we'll continue to make adjustments so California students have a safe place to learn. Before our presenters start, I'm going to briefly talk about the state agencies and what's happening right now with our three main agencies. The State Allocation Board held a teleconference yesterday, the first time ever, and approved emergency regulations allowing the executive officer to temporarily extend timelines for any program. But before you think you're getting an extension, please call and speak to your district's OPSC project manager for them. Their offices are open, and they will have in-person meetings of under 10 people, but strongly suggest that you use teleconference for your meetings. And again, phone calls, emails are great. I had an email from Fred Yeager yesterday. CDE is open and remote. Fred highly encourages submissions. And let's see, in his email to me, he wanted to make sure that people are, again, some are in the office, some are working remotely. And it may take a little longer getting signatures and processing than we typically would, just because with people working with remote, signature here and there, you got to come in. But other than that, people working with remote, signature here and there, you got to come in. But other than that, they're keeping afloat there. Also, DSA offices are open, but please call your area office first to make sure that who you're working with will be there. If you require an in-person meeting, again, use Box as much as be there. If you require an in-person meeting, again, use Box as much as possible, but limit to any in-person meeting to less than 10 people. So let's dive into our presenters today. First, we've got Jeff Becker. Jeff is Vice Chair, and he's with Fresno County Superintendent of Schools Office. And we'll be speaking about county office recommendations. We also have Alan Rising, CASH board member, Long Beach Unified School District. He'll be speaking on cleaning and maintenance, protecting against the COVID-19, a little bit on construction. And we also have Marty Hong, CASH Legislative Advisory Member. He's with Atkins, Andelson, Loya, Root, and Romo. Mario is going to discuss the governor's executive order and impacts on school construction projects. We also have Ian Padilla. He's our legislative advocate with Murdoch. He's going to be refereeing the chat box and assisting with questions. So with this, let's go ahead and kick off and start with Jeff Becker. Jeff?
All right, thanks, Julie, and I think I got my picture up there. So good morning, everybody out there who are teleworking, and for those of you in the office, the role of county offices of education during this crisis. And we'll kind of start at a high level. Some of these are related to the overall leadership of county offices and how they support school districts, as well as what county offices are actually doing themselves as operators to programs. So county offices are direct operators of programs to students, and as we entered this crisis and time of shutting down schools, we discovered that this could present some very unique issues, particularly for our students with special needs. providing services to students with different closure timeframes, different transportation needs, and continue to comply with IEPs has been an interesting thing. Fortunately, in my particular county, we shut down fairly much in unison, but as we restart programs, this could also become an issue going will help us to serve some of our most vulnerable students. Secondarily, coordination with the home school districts for serving meals to those students is important. And I'm going to turn off my printer that someone is printing behind me. Just for noise, sorry about that. And ultimately, those students face a greater risk than our regular students, so we're being particularly cognizant of that. Secondly, we also have court and community school programs, including juvenile halls, and I quickly colleagues regarding that. In Fresno, we're scaling back in-person programs, but our juvenile hall at the time, last information I had, was still asking us to provide some in-person services to those students in that setting. So we're doing that with a very limited number of students. So all that to say, coordinating that with a very limited number of students. So all that to say, coordination with your county office as a direct provider of services to students is important. Essential support services are also being provided by your county office of education to your school districts. Of course, the one to your school districts. Of course, the one that always comes to the top of the list is payroll services, making sure that we're still getting all of our school district employees paid. Secondarily, as we move through this, accounts payable checks typically come through your county office of education. So typically come through your county office of education. So a word of advice to school districts there is to verify if there are any changes in that AP schedule. Make sure that we know how to get those checks into the hands of the school district so that we can continue to provide services and pay our vendors as regularly as possible. So that we can continue to provide services and pay our vendors as regularly as possible. Of course, we're familiar with fiscal oversight that districts provide, and I'll talk a bit more about this as we get down into the finance side, but really it comes down to communicating to make sure that you're at a school county office is looking at. Of course, credentialing is continuing, fingerprinting consortiums that some county offices have continue. Internet and IT services are also provided by many county offices of education. Of course, those resources are fully strained at the moment. So make know that IT staff are working almost around the clock to make sure that we transition as quickly as possible to effective distance learning. Contracted services that county offices provide are also becoming a point that we need to pay attention to. Contracted services for school nursing at school districts, school psychologists and behavioral health professionals could also be something where you need to coordinate with the county office to make sure that services can be provided through the alternate learning platforms as needed to support our kids during this time. And your particular county office may support your districts in other ways as well, so make sure to discuss that with them. So moving a bit more into the COVID-19 crisis, sources of information and guidance, and particularly, again, for our smaller school districts, but as well as large ones to keep us all in sync. County offices of education have a direct line of communication both to CDE. They have the ear of Superintendent Thurman. So we're able to put directly into the ear of the governor and the state superintendent the issues that we're all facing as we go through this. And, of course, the biggest one that we hit was financial issues. So think about your county office as a way to provide support in taking information up to policymakers as well as county's emergency operations center meetings. So they may be getting direct information from county health professionals regarding what's happening locally in your area. Also, guidance on your county office's local interpretations of these orders that are coming out and policies, making sure that what your district is doing is the same as what your county's understanding is of those orders and policies will be helpful as we work through these financing issues. And then the regional circumstances of schools in your area are important to understand, and the county office can be a gathering point for that. And I know that many county offices have been making recommendations to districts regarding the length of school closures based on the information that they have locally. So important that if you are feeling like you're missing out on that information, to reach out, and your county office of education can fill in that. The county office of education can fill in that gap. The last bullet that I have there is a conduit of aligned messaging. And as we go through this point, I may share a bit of what happened in Fresno County, just to emphasize how it looked in schools in regions acting together. Knowing what your neighboring districts are doing can be very helpful, can help us work through issues ourselves amongst each other and avoid creating unintended problems for our neighbors. So, conference calls with every district superintendent on the line. And just as an example of the way that rolled out, there was sharing of messaging going out. Some of our partners, our larger districts, Fresno and Clovis Unified folks, thank you for sharing the messaging and allowing other districts to tailor those messages to their unique circumstances. On Thursday, March 12th, we had a joint press conference with the 5 largest district superintendents and the county superintendent announcing that activities were being canceled. And the very next day, on March 13th, canceled. And the very next day, on March 13th, that, as we all know, that was the day that many districts across the state chose to stop in-person services to students as well. But we were able to do that really fairly in sync as a county, which helped to mitigate a lot of potential problems. You know, ultimately, each district is making, each superintendent board at their district are making their local decisions, but that information sharing was really critical in being able to do it as efficiently as possible under the circumstances. Gene is kind of a shout out to our school district leaders and our district superintendents and boards. You know, these folks have been making some extremely difficult decisions. I think it's fair to say that quite possibly these are the most difficult decisions that a person's making in their entire career. Partners next to them, you know, having 5 superintendents stand next to each other and propping each other up will help us get through this together. So a little bit about funding, and this is all moving very quickly. Of course, the biggest issue and the first issue that came up was ADA waivers, and the week of the 13th, as schools were shutting down, everybody was asking, how are we going to do this? Are we going to lose funding? Do we need that J13 waiver funding? Do we need that J13 waiver for emergencies? And on March 13th, around 5 o'clock, the governor's executive order came out that essentially held districts harmless on the per ADA funding amount. And so if schools had not already made the decision to close at that point in time, that order and the relief given to districts really kind of triggered many more districts to make that same decision. So there's been some evolution of what this is going to look like. You know, again, this is just an order at this point, and there's a lot of detail being worked out behind the scenes. You know, if you looked at it just a week ago, you saw that the guidance was, we're going to use the J13, with the J13 and some of those other certification processes are not going to be required. And in lieu of that, they're working on a new certification of closure for COVID-19 purposes, and that's being developed and should be coming out very soon. So again, we're still kind of working out the details to get the ADA funding. Other questions that have come up include continuing to pay contractors and vendors for services as normal. And I've heard across the field as well that some vendors are asking to be paid, but may not be providing. And the best advice that I have for the field at the time, and as we get into the Q&A, we also have an attorney on the phone with us. My advice with that is to review those contracts for those services, consult with your legal counsel, and I think the admonition of always remembering that we're stewards of public money, as we go through these difficult decisions that we're making. There are a lot of expenditures also that districts are incurring right now on the operational side of the house, that are beyond that ADA waiver. Yes, we're being held harmless on ADA, but we have programs that are operating at losses, like our meals program. And food service programs are funded based on the number of meals that are served. So serving a tremendous amount of meals to our students, which is very noble work, but we're probably also not serving the same number of meals that we served when schools were in session in person. Figuring out how to do that via drive-throughs or bus drivers delivering meals has been such fun. And just yesterday, last night, I saw an email come through regarding the USDA, of course, the federal agency that administers meals, announcing that there'll be a nationwide waiver program to allow parents to pick up meals for their students without the students being present. So that waiver process will be important and can provide a lot of relief as we're trying to shelter in place and reduce contact with others with practicing good social distancing. And those meals still served must be eligible for funding. So I know a lot of districts are hanging out there a little bit on this one, doing what's right for their community, but being sure that we are in a position to be reimbursed as best as possible is important. Distance learning costs, that seemed to be, of course, a very big lift for districts that we took on over the past 2 weeks to minimize the disruption in education to our students. And while, again, we're being funded for ADA, additional costs are being incurred as we transition to that in our normal budgets, including additional devices and how to get internet access to students in homes that may not have that, software licensing, as well as overtime costs for staff as they're moving in this direction. And those are all, again, beyond the normal budgeted expenditures. And those costs are going to ultimately directly reduce the reserves of school districts if they cannot be reimbursed. So let's talk a little bit about eligibility for response-related costs. And again, new information is coming out. New information is coming out just faster than it can be consumed almost. But we did have Senate Bill 117, and that's going to provide $100 million of relief for schools for cleaning school sites and supplies, and the details of how that is going to be distributed to districts and what eligible costs will be for that is still being worked out last I saw. Originally, the language in the bill said that funding is for schools operating in-person programs. And with how fast this developed, I'm hoping although I do not have evidence yet, but that there'll be some relief that money could be used for things that schools are doing, even if they are distance learning. So I know that I've mentioned to my office to carry that message up to the state that we need help in that regard. And the other is the federal bill and potentially having some relief for schools. That's being worked out as well. I would like to make aware districts of FEMA and state reimbursement requirements. California Government Code Section 8607 deals with disaster preparedness, and of course the state has their Emergency Operations Center functioning, and many counties as well have the local entities, including school districts, having to operate under the State Emergency Management System, SIMS, which is, of course, the state's incident command system protocols, and very similar to the National Incident Command System or Incident Management System, NIMS, federal protocols. So I'm advising looking into implementing those to preserve eligibility for reimbursements if they possibly come through FEMA. School Services posted an article on the 24th regarding FEMA reimbursements, along with a link to the guidance document that's about 200 plus pages long. And of course there was a federal major disaster declaration, that article also references. It was FEMA 4482-DR, specifically referring to a California disaster declaration. So there may be FEMA money as well. And finally, I've heard anecdotally of school nurses in some counties being called into service at the county health department level. And in my thinking, that is clearly something that working through the incident command system through the state level and NIMS at the federal level would be something that would trigger potential reimbursements there. So to wrap up a little bit here, this situation, as Julie mentioned, is changing by the day, if not hourly even, with information coming out. So the with your legal folks as you're taking action on contracts, work with your county offices of education for consistent messaging and taking information to state policymakers, as well as understanding interpretations of the things that we do know, and staying up to date on this is critical. So again, county offices can help communicate that information directly and take some of that workload off of the plate of districts who are really on the front lines. And finally, let me say districts are making some very serious financial decisions based on less than ideal amounts of information and really broad assurances at the state and federal levels that they will be taken care of. Nonetheless, I think most of these financial questions are going to be fully resolved after the wave of the pandemic has passed. And so districts need to be prepared to account for the actions and funding decisions and seeking reimbursement wherever possible. And districts' ability to seek those reimbursements, I think, is very important. And so hopefully your county offices are coming to you in school districts ready and willing to help with that. So the last thing I'll say is just kind of to share the words to live by around my office, as all of our colleagues and family members, as much grace and flexibility and assumption of best intentions as we work through this crisis together. And so I will leave it at that and pass over to Alan at the moment. So Alan, if you could jump on. I will leave it at that and pass over to Alan at the moment. So Alan, if you could jump on.
Let me unmute here. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. So I'm going to take a minute and kind of drop down kind of to the ground level and let me unmute here. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. So I'm going to take a minute and kind of drop down kind of to the ground level and talk a little bit about what we've been doing here in Long Beach as it relates to the more immediate reaction and some of the things that our classified teams have been doing in response to this. The key item that we've been working towards is just, it's an evolving situation and flexibility, right? Every day we're having multi-meeting updates as we talk with our local health department and center, speaking, as Jeff had said, with our local county office of education to confirm exactly where we are with the flexibility and the changes that are happening. Like most districts, we closed our schools officially on Monday the 16th. That was, and the first reaction we had, which was that immediate response, we began the process of not only communicating with our local health department, but also engaging all of our classified custodial staff with a program of disinfection and cleaning our classrooms. Obviously, at that point, we didn't really know if we had a larger widespread outbreak or not, and so we began a process using all of our custodial teams and all of our classified staff, for that matter, that we retained. So all of those folks have continued to work full days. We have not sent, at this point, we had not sent anybody home to work from home. So we really began to address our schools in a very meaningful manner. We also began to engage our maintenance teams and servicing all of our HVAC systems, looking at things like filters and cleaning of areas that could potentially have harbored some of the virus. Some of it we did clearly as a reaction to the potential for the virus to harbor there, but also some of it was to provide a level of assurance to some of our customers that we're servicing that we are addressing these schools in a very meaningful manner. Initially, we weren't sure how long we were going to be out. Initially, there was discussion of a couple of weeks. It ended up being 6. So we really began to, in earnest, go after our school sites to clean and disinfect them using our custodial services. We also followed the basic guidelines from CDC on what products to use. Most of our normal disinfection materials that we would use were adequate. This group. Early on, forecasting the need of our community, we continued our nutrition services program almost seamlessly for the community. The community response to that has been growing. It started fairly sporadic, but we've continued to serve meals to our public throughout this entire crisis as we worked with them and providing that level of support. School sites themselves, all the staff at the school sites have been sent home with the exception of administration. So our classified staff have stepped up to provide things like crowd control, organization of school sites, all of those things to help support the nutrition program and ensuring that we get adequate meals out to all of our students in our community. The last thing we began to work on right away was the availability of materials. We began to look, we're fortunate, we're a large district, we have a pretty large warehousing system, but we began the process of sourcing and being able to acquire those materials that we need, both the cleaners, sanitizers, filters, all of the other things that we felt we would need if this turned into an extended period of time. Week one, really looking closely at how do we engage the schools immediately and be able to clean and disinfect, which moves us into week two, which I kind of call making some adjustments. We've learned a lot as we've engaged with all of our disaster partners out there. The department actually is calling us. Excuse me, my occupancy sensor went off. Let me do the wave. Apologize for that. So really to make those ongoing adjustments. Starting this week, we actually began to send home non-critical staff. These are folks that had the ability to work from a social distancing requirements. So most of my construction teams have now been sent home or are working on independent school sites, project trailers, those kind of things where they can actually remove themselves and distance themselves from contact with groups of people or activities to support the distance learning. As I said, we're sending folks out. We're positioning them in different offices. We began to look at what we called our critical functions in the event that this were to turn into a major outbreak, which if you listen to some of the governor's comments, about 50% of our community being impacted by this virus, we began to look at the services that we provided and dividing those, actually splitting some of those services into different offices with the thought that if an office had to close due to a quarantine action or something of those lines, that we would then still be able to retain function, but in different areas. So we split some of our maintenance functions, we split our technology functions, we began to split even some of our business functions to ensure that we divide some of those activities. We also began to begin preparations for increased levels of vandalism. We began to see an uptick of vandalism, school sites that are being broken into. It hasn't been a material uptick, but there has definitely been an uptick in hand that will allow us to respond in the event that this becomes a wider spread issue, where potentially supply houses would be shut down, where potentially the normal distribution chains would be disrupted. We began to acquire things such as pallets of plywood, other types of things that we would use in board up or vandalism situations. We also began to implement long-term plans for what would happen if we went down to the absolute bare minimum of our skeletal staff, putting together plans for each of our skeletal staff, putting together plans for each of my operational units on who would be those minimal critical staff members that would need to retain on, and more importantly, who's the backup in the event that those individuals were to be impacted by this virus, so that we would have several levels of backup as if we were operating at an extreme minimal level. We also began in earnest this week with our distance learning support. As you know, the governor gave school districts direct be able to acquire or to collect devices. Our district is going through, even currently today, handing out Chromebooks to students that don't have digital devices. But obviously that effort is larger than what our maintenance teams and our operations teams to help with the collecting, the organizing, and the distribution of those digital devices. We've also begun the process of acquiring or attempting to acquire hotspots. A lot of our students, especially our more needy students, don't have the access to wireless. So we've worked with our local Verizon rep to purchase a large quantity of these devices so that we could provide them to students as well. We also really began to look at the need for PPE. There's a lot of concerns related to our staff that are actually still on the front lines working on the need for and availability of personal protective equipment. Working with our local county office to determine what actually is needed for each of our staff members, and to begin the process of acquiring that to provide the PPE. That's a difficult proposition. Everybody is currently out, so we're acquiring them from from all sorts of locations, including, and I found this very interesting, that we are getting it from a local microbrewery here in Long Beach who actually is using their alcohol production to create hand sanitizer, and so we're actually so it's an interesting development there. So in addition to that, we're also looking at our construction program. That has been somewhat of a hot topic with our contractors, especially when the governor's order came out and was a little unsure of how that may or may not impact with our contractors and our legal staff to come up with recommendations for how we should address that. We've been in constant contact with our major general contractors who are currently still working on our jobs to ensure them that our interpretation of the governor's direction is that they should keep working. So that's largely been taken well. We have had some smaller subcontractors that have elected to either close or pull off the jobs, but it hasn't been material. And to date, we haven't really seen any delay. And to date, we haven't really seen any delays associated with the virus on our construction program. So that kind of brings us up through even this week. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're looking at going into next week, and exactly what we're beginning to plan on here in our district. We are beginning to have those conversations about an extended closure. If our district made decisions to go even beyond our May 6th deadline, what would that look like? And really looking at what is this process or closure, and how does that impact a lot of the current programs? Again, I mentioned earlier about breaking up programs, moving them into different areas so that we could continue to work. We've said really as we begin to look through that new reality of what does social distancing mean and how do we continue to provide a level of service while we're still maintaining that. We've also are moving into, even this week, community messaging. We've got a lot of folks that are out, community messaging. We've got a lot of folks that are out here working hard every day in our classified teams, and we really want to get those messages out to the community for a level of reassurance. Your school sites are safe. We are cleaning them. We are disinfecting them. We are ensuring that We are ensuring that when you return, that there is no concern that there could be some lingering issues there. It's almost a surety that if, per the governor's prediction, if we have 50% of our community that is impacted by this virus, that there will be many of our own school site staff, many of our own district staff that will be impacted by this. And so what is that messaging that we're putting out to our community related to our efforts to ensure that the school site is still safe and we can come back when that decision is safe and we can come back when that decision is made. We continue to support our nutrition services program. We're currently up to about 20,000 meals per day that we're serving to our community, and it's growing by the day. But we are reevaluating the locations. We initially started by serving meals at every school site. Participation was fairly low, and so we're beginning to bring those into certain sites. I think we're in the neighborhood of about 30 locations we will be closing and moving those operations to centralized locations that will help us as we look at distribution chains and a level of efficiency to help us to ensure that students are able to get the nutrition that they need. We are refocusing our custodial efforts. A lot of that has to do with going back and re-cleaning areas. As distance learning has increased, our teachers are sporadically coming back to our schools as they begin to put together lesson planning and they need to retrieve the items, the instructional items that they have. So we are actually going through a program of re-disinfecting, I'll call it, areas where staff has come in. At this point, we don't know who has come in. At this point, we don't know who may or may not be carrying the virus. So if we do have people returning to our schools, we are coming back and reclaiming those efforts. We're also looking at other areas. Questions have come up about like playgrounds and fields that we maintain, synthetic turf fields specifically. Many of our community is not honoring the stay-at-home orders. So we're finding a lot of community members are trespassing onto our school sites, and they're using the playground equipment, they're using the fields, and so we're beginning a program of cleaning those devices. We're going through and cleaning those and contributing to a community spread of the virus due to unwitting or unknown community members coming on our school site. Staff communications has really been an ongoing concern for us. There's a lot of our classified staff that are justifiably concerned about still communications with our classified folks to ensure that they understand that we're working very closely with the health department. We are very concerned about their health, to keep them viable and keep them working with us as we go through this process, and ensure that the PPEs that we can get, that they're available to them. And we're working very hard with our internal folks to come up with additional PPE opportunities, such as working with the local brewery to come up with some hand sanitizer. And then lastly, dealing with these inevitable construction delays that will come up. We've begun we've received quite a few letters from our construction teams, specifically about implementing force majeure. In fact, just moments ago, I received 2 more letters from contractors that are giving us preliminary notices that they may, in fact, be delayed on some of their deliveries of construction, and so putting us on notice that this may become a bigger issue. Also, in the same area, we've run into, I think Jeff Becker mentioned the concept of continuing to pay our contractors. One most notable that we're dealing with is our transportation contractors. We rely heavily on transportation bus drivers to provide our special education busing services. Really has become a problem because we've been put on notice that busing services goes down. We may be in a situation where they would lose all of their drivers, and we would end of this pandemic. So we're working very close with them to how do we ensure that we keep the drivers ready for the time when we actually come back. So if that means we may have to pay them, we're working through that now. So don't have an answer yet, but it's something that we're working on. And then just to kind of cap it all off, again, I started with the term flexibility. That's what it's all been about. Every day has been be ready for the inevitable, or be ready for something you're not ready for. So everything that we've talked about right now, tomorrow may be different as new rules and new game plan comes down to us. But we're here. All of our teams are here. We're working hard to ensure that we're maintaining our school sites ready for what could be a long ride here as we go through this process. But the classified staff has really been stepping up to do their job and stay ahead of this. So with that, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to pass the baton off to Marty Holmes. He's a member of our Cash Legislative Advisory Committee. He's also a partner with Atkins, Annelson, Ludd, Royden, and Romero, and he's going to talk a little bit about the governor's executive order. So, Marty, it's all yours.
Thanks, Alan. Let me try my video. Oh, there. So hopefully my office isn't too messy. This part's going to talk about is the governor's executive order and the impacts on school construction projects. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to see or has at least heard of Executive Order N33-20. So first off, let me just talk a little bit about what is an executive. Under the law, the governor has the ability to direct state agencies. So if you actually look at this executive order, it's really interesting. The governor directs all residents to immediately heed the current public state health directives. So if you actually, does an executive order have the same effect as a law? So technically it doesn't. And I think that's why the governor uses the term heed. So when this came out on March 19th, it basically said follow the public health directives, and it said things that are exempted are going to be the federal critical infrastructure workers. If you go to the CISA website, it says for public works that the critical ones are things like dams, locks, wastewater, water projects, and transportation. Locks, wastewater, water projects, and transportation. Didn't really mention anything about schools. So later that night, the governor's webpage actually lists as the critical items schools, childcare, and construction. So there was a lot, all construction was included, or whether that was just essential construction. But a lot of people have gone back and forth on this, and Cash has taken the position, if you saw the notice from Julie, that it's really essential construction. And we've had lots of discussion on that. So for perhaps your project, if you have a project that's open and maybe structurally unsound, obviously that's going to be critical. But I think for the purposes of this, on a case-by-case basis, you're really going to have to look at all of your projects, where they are, what stage they're in, because we've had lots of questions like, should I even accept bids that are currently in progress? Are you supposed to be following the social distancing? I think the answer to that is yes. Also be aware that Cal OSHA has put out guidelines for construction projects. I'm not sure if anybody actually practices this, but under Cal OSHA, some of the guidelines say, you're supposed to take the temperature of all the workers coming onto the site. And if they have a certain temperature, they're not allowed on the site. And of course, there's the social distancing. Then you're going to run into kind of questions about the social distancing. Then you're going to run into kind of questions about, well, is that going to affect productivity or not? Most likely it's going to. So I think the best strategy here in looking at the governor's executive order is to really look at the projects on a case-by-case basis. Can they be delayed? Will they be delayed? And which one should really be going forward? As Alan talked about, some of the contractors may say, I can't get certain equipment or products, so that's going to cause a delay. Go through your contracts and look for clause, acts of God clause. Some may even take the position that the whole contract is frustrated because you can't complete the contract because of some of what's been going on. So if you're not aware, the force majeure act of God is pretty much the same thing, but a lot of them will say, riots, epidemics, things like that. So usually a force majeure clause will excuse performance and allow a contract to be delayed. So in this case, it would be a no-cost delay. And you're going to have to address some of these on a case-by-case basis. As I keep saying, is what happens if a contractor just refuses to come to the site and perform because they're scared of the current coronavirus or things like that. Let's see. And if you keep having to go back to the governor's webpage because, as I said, on the 19th, the executive order came out, and that night on the webpage, you have to do schools, childcare, and construction. And I think on the 21st, the governor added to that webpage suppliers to construction. So I think the intent here is to try and keep things moving the best they can. I don't know that I had too much else on that. Are there any questions? let's see. Oh, they didn't get included. So I guess we're off to Ian for questions.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Ian, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. Very anticipated, and I think some folks, some of the presenters have been answering them as we went along, but what I'm going to do is a review, and maybe we can ask some of the presenters to have an opportunity to go a little bit deeper, and maybe that will kick off some other chat questions. So once again, folks, if you have questions, comments, please don't hesitate to use the chat box. So what we've had so far is some questions about paying vendors and so on. Some of that has been answered, but we could talk a little bit about that. Also, social distancing with regard to some of the classified staff. I think M&O, Alan has answered that a little bit, but I think that's a broader question that we could get into. Also, funding generally, some of the funding generally, some of the ADA hold harmless pieces, and also SB 117. There was a question about that. I think what the number was, and I think it was clarified. Again, that's $100 million for some. What have you done? What do you see going forward in terms of the infrastructure needed to support distance learning for any of the timelines, whether it's May 6th or going forward, should that be the case? So with that, I'm going to turn that over to the presenters to see what...
Can't see me, but sure, I'm a phantom here. You can hear my voice. Alan, when you were talking about classified employees and the work that they were doing in the district, and some of it would have been work that they were not normally assigned to, I found that to be very important for our members to hear. I've said forever as a longtime educator that classified employees are the backbone of school districts, and here they're clearly in Long Beach. They're demonstrating that. Did you need to review contract language before you asked for changes? Do you need to review contract language before you asked for changes in their workstations and what it was that you were directing them to do?
Yeah, so we began to engage with the Yeah, so we began to engage with the various different unions almost immediately upon the decision that we were going to close school sites, and so they have been a very close partner with us, understanding that we are responding to a global emergency. One of the first things that we had said was, due to the state's determination this was an emergency, we asked for some flexibility in the common held job description or job responsibility section, so that we knew right away that we were going to be asking individuals to do things that were traditionally not part of their job work assignment. And the unions have been workable with that within reasons. Obviously, they're concerned about what we're doing, and we're communicating with them. But we've union side. One of the issues, obviously, that has been a continuous topic is the safety of their members. And what the district is doing to ensure that the membership has all of the proper protections, specifically as it relates to PPE, social distancing. There was a question that popped up about social distancing. This has been something that's been a topic of late. What we've done is we've worked with site supervisors or unit supervisors to ensure that the tasks that are being assigned are being assigned with social distancing in mind, such as we're not going to have multiple people there that are all needed in order to move heavy furniture. We're gonna look at how do we defer those tasks. We are gonna assign people work that allows them to work independently as much as possible. Those type of adjustments to what they're doing. We've also looked at, specifically on our maintenance side, the way that we route individuals. Traditionally, like the group of folks that go over their assignments for the day and then they're dispatched out to school sites. We've disbanded that. All of our people are now immediately being assigned either via phone or the night before, so there's no longer any congregating of maintenance teams told to remain either in their trucks or somewhere in a shop by themselves, and then our supervisors are just dispatching them following these social distancing requirements. It has taken a lot of adjustments, especially as we move into future iterations of what this will look like, to ensure that that we follow those guidelines.
And Alan, when it comes to providing the food service that you were identifying in 20,000 a day, can you describe how a day? Can you describe how social distancing and the care that you have for both employees and for parents or students is recognizing social distancing, and what it is that you is recognizing social distancing, and what it is that you are requiring and also recommending?
Yeah, this is something that's been somewhat of an evolving situation. Initially, I think the directions that we were getting were that in following the National Food Service Program, that we would have to physically hand off meals to students that were going to receive them. The first couple of days of doing this, we were actually allowing students to come up, and we were physically handing. That evolved middle of last week, where the directions that we were being given by the health department were that we could do a kind of a grab and go type of scenario, where we have lunches that are put out, and the students are able to come up and be able to grab those program. It has all been through lines, although there's discussions that we're currently having about converting to a valet type of program, where you drive up and then we're able to drop lunches either in their car or in their trunk or those type of things. We're actually working through that now with our alternatives for them about how they're going to engage with the public. We really looked at them as being, quote unquote, the point of the sword as it pertains to contact with the public.
And Alan, with regard to special needs students that you have in the district, you and I had a conversation the other day about that. Could you comment what it is that you're doing to make sure that you are meeting their needs, but also recognizing that they may, as we heard Jeff talk about, that they may be meeting their needs, but also recognizing that they may, as we heard Jeff talk about, that they may be more at risk because of this virus?
Yeah, the special needs children have really been particularly problematic because just because of the nature and their needs have been particularly problematic because just because of the nature and their needs as a student and whether or not the district is going to engage in a home delivery program. So we have not done that yet. That is something that quite literally as of yesterday we were in contact with our special ed program to really discuss how those students are able to get their meals. Currently, though, we are delivering those just as we would in any other child through a program at their local. Originally started somewhere around 75 sites that were delivering meals, and we're now looking at how do we pare that down and actually use some of that forces to possibly implement a home delivery program.
And Alan, just with
Tom, for our special ed students, we are doing a home delivery, but what we're doing is we're delivering the week's meals all at one time. And that way we're not taking and having to go back to, we're bringing breakfast and lunch to each child, special ed child's home on a Monday that would get them through the rest of the week.
We also implemented an adjustment to our delivery program. The first few days of the program, we actually had two separate meal programs. We had a breakfast service and we had a lunch service. We have since amended that to a breakfast and a lunch together, so that the concept is the child would be able to enjoy their lunch, and then the next morning they would have a breakfast. So what that did was it was able to minimize the contact with the public to just one service period, as opposed to having multiple service periods for our nutrition program. But
Right.
We have not yet implemented a home program.
Right. Okay. So, Tom, let's jump. I know we're running out of time here. Let's talk real quick about payments. I think that was one of the ones Ian had talked about with the school district. So right now, Palm City, our vendors, our problem is our fiscal service employees are actually, they're rotating. So what we do is we find out who's in the rotation basis each day here, and when we process payments, we send that to that person directly, as opposed to typically M through Z was sent here. So we're doing it. Our county that actually processes our warrants and checks, again, we're a little slower, but everyone is basically doing their best to make sure that we get every check out and everyone paid and each invoice processed.
And one of the things that I think, Julie, that it would be important for everyone listening to hear is that as we were preparing for this webinar, and you and I talking about these very things not only last week but the week before, that recognizing that contractors, just as you were saying, Alan, about bus drivers and bus service entities, are part of the local economy and have done work and are expecting to be paid. That keeping all of those administrative machines working within school districts is part of, I think, what the governor was trying to encourage districts to do by saying schools may be closed, but those functions of school districts are not, as districts have to continue to do the things that Alan's described and you've just described, including paying contractors. And of course, county offices are part of that process in generating warrants to contractors and those that are suppliers. I know, Julie, what I wanted to make sure that we did was to have our members and everyone listening to know that we are going to have another webinar. Again, it will be Thursday of next week, April 2nd at 11 o'clock. It'll go from 11 to 12:15. The focus maintenance projects moving forward, we are calling construction project continuation and or cessation, delays, and paying contractors during this coronavirus crisis, so that the focus will really be to drill down deeper on that on particular webinar. So we're expanding it for next week. We'll have practitioners, we'll have a CM, we'll have hopefully Marty back again, potentially another attorney talking about these things, and taking your questions, the questions that I've seen that were attorney talking about these things, and taking your questions, the questions that I've seen that we haven't been able to answer that relate to construction and paying contractors and the issue of taking the temperature of workers. We'll try to address those things as we prepare for the webinar. Temperature of workers. We'll try to address those things as we prepare for the webinar next week. It's also our intent to come back the following week and the week after as long as this crisis continues, to try to provide information to our members. And just one last company that we'll be using, we believe, for next week. So please pay attention to that. When you hear from Samantha Campbell from our office, she will be communicating out to everyone that will register for that particular webinar. Thank you, Julie.
Well, and contractors, the governor's order, and that school construction is exempt from the shelter-in-place. And I have been reached out to after we sent our memo out and wanting to make sure that, yes, school construction is exempt, and the hope is they do keep it in place. The number one thing is social distancing. And so that's something that's a big concern. If you've got a construction site where you're closing up a building and you're not able to keep social distancing with your workers, you're going to have to do something else, because that's the number one thing, is making sure that you're keeping everyone healthy and safe, and two, you don't want to shut down that construction site. So it's going to take a lot more work on our construction superintendents. And I will tell you what, I have heard from a few, and our contractors out there, our superintendents on site, are doing an amazing job, because they're trying to juggle the trades, juggle the work, make sure everyone's getting their materials and supplies in, and keeping everyone safe as well, and rotating to make sure there aren't as many people in areas and rooms. I give them major kudos. And again, our food service it is, for our district, we're not as big as Long Beach. We fed 25,000 students yesterday on food. That's amazing. We've got a huge need in our area as well as others. And that's why I know it's difficult, and like I said, districts are struggling and frustrated with the construction order. And I think you're going to have to look at your district and what their capabilities are to keep it open. And your contractor, you might be working with a small contractor who has family members at home that may have immune problems and don't want to actually worry about contaminating themselves. I think there are some procedures you can do, as OSHA stated, on taking temperatures, but maybe we walk around our sites a little bit and we make sure we keep an eye out to look and see if we're seeing people who look like they may not be feeling well, or that dry cough or that fever happening, may not be feeling well, or that dry cough or that fever happening. And if you've got contractors that are worried, maybe they bring an extra set of clothes with them. And when they leave the construction site, as they pull up to their house or their hotel, wherever they're staying at, they basically change out of the clothes they wore, put clean clothes on before they go in, and make sure those clothes are put in a bag of some type, taken inside and thrown right in the wash. You can do some extra procedures. I know it's a little extraordinary right now, but if we just focus on the next 15, 16, 17 days, we can keep everyone safe.
Julie, I'd like to comment on that as well, too, because I know there's some questions that popped up about, is it the right thing to do to keep construction working? Our contractors have been very original, bringing in a double amount of porta potties so that we don't have to share as much. We've implemented that the contractors have Hudson sprayers with a bleach solution, and they shoot down the porta potties on an hourly basis to ensure that they're areas for lunches, so that staff on construction sites have enough areas to disperse when they do have their lunches. Just changing schedules to ensure that we don't have as many staff members in the same proximity of each other. It's been very interesting. We've also implemented, Long Beach maintains our own owner's controlled insurance program, so I've actually adjusted our safety inspectors, so they're actually looking at that now and providing guidance to our construction contractors on things that they can do to ensure even a safer environment. even a safer environment. So we are very cognizant of it, and we do feel good that continuing construction at this point is the right thing to do.
Correct. And
Julie,
if you're, go ahead, Tom.
Julie, I just wanted to make sure that, covering some of what was discussed earlier, I wanted to make sure our members know that our intent is for questions that we haven't been able to answer. If they're related to construction, we'll try to see what we can answer next week in the webinar. But our intent is to collect those questions and to try to sort them as Ian was trying to assist our members with that, and we'll try to provide that in some form potentially early next week.
Super. I know as we're really getting pushed right to the end here, it will be, and today, who knows what we're going to have to say to everyone with changes taking place, and hopefully we're going to have some great news. I really feel that we're seeing the government's willingness to enact extreme containment measures throughout the globe. I mean, states here, I think our California governor is taking quick, decisive measures and actions, and one, trying to keep everyone safe and healthy, and two, to keep the economy moving as much as we can. And I think with the passage of the stimulus last night for the American people, I think that's going to help directly. I think warmer weather's coming, and that's going to help. And we've got a potential for a vaccine and medicine that they're still trying right now to help those that have been infected. I think there are some really positives going to take place. We want to continue to the best we can to make sure that our construction and our schools are safe and healthy. And I think that's the main thing to get out of this. I think together, if we keep communicating and talking amongst each other and try and share best practices, and again, what may work for Palm Springs Unified, because I have a facilities department with 2 project managers, may not work for a small district where the superintendent's running the construction, and that's getting kids safe, making sure teachers are safe, and that distance learning is taking place. So every school district has their own challenges, and it's just not one size fits all across the board. So with that, go ahead, Tom.
Can I just interrupt? Just one thing. I see several people are saying, who can they address? If I can impose upon you to be the recipient of these and maybe have people email them to you, and if you could type in your email address so that everybody sees it. When we close out this webinar, the questions I know are going to go from the screens of people, but we will have them. You could put in your email address, and if you don't mind typing in mine as well, if they could send them to you and to me, and then we'll collect them and we'll address them. And again, those that relate to construction, we'll cull through them, and we'll see what we can answer with our expert team. Going to be the panel for next week and the webinar next week. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And I really want to thank all our presenters, Jeff, Alan, Marty, and thank you, Ian, for being the chat wrangler on the line here.
Absolutely.
And we'll get those out. Sign off. I just want to leave you with a little look outside our window here. It's a beautiful day in Palm Springs. Just to share with everyone, we're going to have a high of 75 here today, so sunshine all day. So again, just saying, don't come visit Coachella Valley. Everyone take care. Please stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to talking with you again next Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Alan and Ian.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.